She phoned me at 3 a.m., my card failed. Send $2,000 right now. I said call your dad and went to bed. The next day, police called me. My fiancé was just arrested in Las Vegas. And I got the phone call at 3:17 a.m., not to bail her out, but to finally save myself from the woman I almost married. It was a quiet Colorado night, the kind where the silence usually lulls you into peace. But that night, the air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing, even though the skies were clear. For 3 months, I'd been planning a wedding. And for 2 years, I'd been living a lie. I'm Ethan, an HVAC tech in Colorado. I make decent money, nothing extravagant, but enough to live comfortably, save for a house, and take a yearly vacation. Sophia, my fiancée, worked in marketing, earning around $40,000. Respectable, right? Except she spent money like she was pulling in 6 figures. Seriously, designer bags monthly, brunches where a single drink was $22, weekly manicures, the whole Instagram fantasy, but she wasn't an influencer. When we started dating, I figured maybe her family was just wealthy and quiet about it. You know how some people are. But then, little things started not adding up. Her 4 closest friends, Chloe, Isabella, Mia, and Ava, were all married to guys who actually did make serious money. Investment banking, tech executives, commercial real estate. That level. Whenever we hung out, I felt this strange pressure, like Sophia was constantly trying to match their lifestyle, despite her own reality being worlds apart. The first major red flag, though, should have been her subtle criticism of the engagement ring I bought. Not outright at first, just little remarks. Chloe's ring is 2 carats, or Isabella's fiancé upgraded hers for their anniversary. I spent 4 months' salary on that ring. It was beautiful. But it wasn't enough. Her friends had set an impossible standard. Then came the money arguments. These weren't small disagreements. These were brutal, full-blown fights. She'd call me cheap because I suggested cooking dinner instead of dropping $150 at some trendy spot. Or because I refused to finance a brand new car when my paid-off truck ran perfectly fine. One night, after a particularly vicious fight where she called my life boring and said I had no ambition, I did some digging. Nothing crazy. Just a few careful questions to mutual acquaintances. That's when I found out her parents, specifically Mr. Sterling, had cut her off financially 2 years ago. Right when we started dating. But she'd spun this elaborate story for everyone, including me, about them still supporting her lifestyle. The lie was so consistent, so detailed, I never questioned it until things started to unravel. Looking back, she probably saw me as a financial replacement for her parents from day one. Okay, so this is where it really spiraled. Sophia announced she wanted her bachelorette party in Las Vegas. Fine, lots of people do destination parties. But her plan? Fly out her sister and all 4 friends, stay at a luxury hotel on the Strip, bottle service, yacht rental, the works. She estimated it would be around $3,000 per person. I nearly choked. We were supposed to be saving for our wedding, for a house. When I asked how she planned to pay, she got defensive. Her friends were covering their own costs, she said, and her dad was paying for her and her sister. About $6,000 total. I mentioned that seemed like a lot to ask from her parents, especially since I'd heard things were tight with them. She exploded. Absolutely screamed at me, accusing me of trying to control her, ruin her moment, listening to gossip, not trusting her. Then she packed a bag and went to stay with Chloe for 3 days. Completely ghosted me, except for these icy texts that somehow made me feel like the bad guy. When she finally came back, she acted like nothing happened. Casually mentioned everything was sorted. Her dad had agreed to cover all her Las Vegas expenses, and I should just stop worrying about money so much. It made me seem insecure and honestly, kind of pathetic. I wanted to believe her. I really did. We'd already sent out save the dates to 150 people, and I'd put a non-refundable $1,500 deposit on a venue. So, I convinced myself. Maybe I was being too controlling. Maybe her dad had come through. Maybe I just needed to let her have this one trip, and then we'd get back on track after the wedding. She flew out to Las Vegas on a Thursday morning. Almost immediately, my Instagram feed exploded with her stories. And I'm talking luxury on a level her dad never would have paid for. A suite at the Cosmopolitan with an ocean view that probably ran $300 a night minimum. Bottles of champagne that cost more than my monthly truck payment. Designer shopping bags from Gucci and Louis Vuitton. Every single post was dripping with this performative wealth that just made my stomach churn. Her friends were posting too, tagging exclusive beach clubs like Dre's and restaurants like STK, where the dress code probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. I kept thinking, something doesn't add up here. This isn't what a dad paying for his daughter's bachelorette trip looks like. This is what someone drowning in credit card debt looks like. By Saturday night, I couldn't sleep. Just this gnawing feeling in my gut that everything was about to explode. I kept refreshing her Instagram stories, watching her and her friends pop bottles at some rooftop club overlooking the strip. All I could think was, how much is this actually costing? And who's really paying for it? Because I knew damn well it wasn't her dad. I still didn't know that in less than 48 hours, I'd get a phone call that would completely destroy any future we might have had. But looking back, every single red flag was waving right in my face. I'd just been too invested, too afraid of starting over, to actually see them. Sunday rolls around, and I'm watching Sophia's Instagram stories around 2 in the afternoon. They're at some beach club with cabanas that probably cost $1,000 just to reserve. Bottles everywhere. Her friends dancing on tables. The whole scene just screaming money nobody in that group should have been spending, except maybe Chloe's husband, a VP at some investment firm. The thing that really got me was how calculated it all looked. Every single story was designed to show off maximum luxury, designer sunglasses reflecting the Las Vegas sun, champagne showers literally wasting expensive bottles for the aesthetic. That weird influencer lifestyle that's supposed to look effortless but costs a fortune to maintain. I'm sitting on my couch in my 10-year-old joggers, thinking about how we were supposed to be saving for a wedding in 4 months, and how I'd been eating leftovers all week to cut costs. Then the stories stopped around midnight their time. I assumed they'd finally called it a night. I went to bed around 1:30, feeling uneasy, but telling myself I was probably overreacting. Maybe her dad really had been generous. Maybe I needed to just trust my fiancé and stop being so paranoid about money. This was her bachelorette party, I needed to let her have fun. My phone started ringing at exactly 3:17 a.m. I knew before I even looked at the screen that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Nobody calls at 3 in the morning with good news. Nobody. When I saw Sophia's name, I almost didn't answer, but some instinct, maybe just years of trained responsibility, made me pick up. She was crying. Not sad crying, but panicked, hyperventilating crying. The kind where someone can barely get words out, and you can hear the terror in their voice. Through the chaos, I heard her say, "My card declined. Ethan, my card declined. And we're stuck at this club, and they won't let us leave." I was barely awake, trying to process what she was telling me while my brain was still foggy from sleep. Nothing she was saying made any sense. She explained, or tried to explain between sobs and gasps, that they'd gone to this exclusive club on the strip called Omnia. The kind of place where you need to know someone or drop serious money just to get in. They'd ordered bottles of Grey Goose and Dom Perignon, and apparently ordered food from the VIP menu. They'd run up a tab of $8,000. Except, when the bill came at closing time, every single card got declined. Hers, her sister's, even Isabella's backup American Express. The club manager was threatening to call the police unless they paid at least $6,000 in cash right that second. Immediately. No negotiations, no payment plans. I asked her where Chloe and the other girls were. Surely someone in that group had access to money or could call their husband for help. Sophia said they were all scrambling, trying to figure it out, calling banks and checking account balances, but they'd only managed to pull together $4,000 between all 5 of them. She needed me to send $2,000 right this second through Zelle or Venmo or whatever would work fastest. The club had taken all their IDs and driver's licenses. They literally couldn't leave the building. And there was a security guard standing right there, making sure nobody ran. That's when everything clicked into place for me. Like suddenly, all those Instagram stories, the designer bags, the expensive dinners, the ring criticism, it all made perfect sense. I realized her dad hadn't paid for anything. Not a single dollar. She'd been putting this entire trip on credit cards that were now completely maxed out. And she'd been lying to me for months, maybe years, about her actual financial situation. And I was supposed to be the bank that bailed her out. I sat there in my bed in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my fiancé beg me for $2,000 to get out of a Las Vegas nightclub at 3 a.m. And I felt this weird calm wash over me. Like the kind of clarity you get when you finally see something you've been avoiding for way too long. When the illusion just completely shatters. I said, "Call your dad." She immediately started crying harder. "I can't, Ethan. I can't call him. You have to do this. You're my fiancé. You're supposed to help me. This is what partners do." I could hear her friends yelling in the background, and some man's voice with a thick accent, probably the manager, saying something about police and theft of services, and how this happens every weekend with girls like them. I told her one more time, very calmly. Probably the calmest I'd been in months. "Sophia, call your father. I'm not sending you money for this." And then I did something I'd never done in our entire 2-year relationship. I hung up on her mid-sentence, turned off my phone completely, and went back to sleep. I'm not going to lie, I slept better that night than I had in months. Like some massive weight had been lifted. When I turned my phone back on around 7 a.m., I had 63 missed calls, probably 200 text messages, and a bunch of voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. The messages ranged from Sophia begging and apologizing and promising she'd pay me back, to her friends calling me every name in the book. Telling me I was a terrible person, a coward, that I'd abandoned my fiancé in her darkest hour. What kind of man lets his future wife get arrested over money? That I was financially abusive for not helping? That word, arrested, made my stomach drop. Up until that moment, I'd kind of assumed they'd figured something out. Maybe called someone's parents or worked out a payment plan. But apparently, things had escalated way beyond what I'd imagined while I was peacefully sleeping. Around 9:30, I got a call from a Clark County Police Department number. When I answered, this very tired-sounding officer with a thick Nevada accent explained that Sophia had been arrested around 5 a.m. for theft of services and disorderly conduct. Apparently, she'd gotten belligerent with the club staff when they wouldn't let her leave. They were holding her on a $1,000 bond. The club was also pursuing an $8,000 civil claim for the unpaid tab plus damages. The officer asked if I was planning to post bail. I said, no, I wasn't. He sounded surprised and asked if I was sure, because usually fiancés help out in situations like this. I told him I was very sure. He just said okay then and hung up, like he'd dealt with 1,000 situations like this before and mine wasn't even that interesting to him. The next few hours were absolutely insane. Sophia's friends blowing up my phone with increasingly angry messages. Her sister leaving me voicemails, crying and begging me to help, saying I was destroying their family. Even Chloe's husband called me and tried to do this whole bro thing about how we need to take care of our women, and sometimes that means bailing them out of tough situations. I'm thinking, dude, your wife helped create and enable this entire disaster. You don't get to lecture me about responsibility when Chloe was probably the one encouraging all this spending. Then around 2 p.m., I got the call that changed everything. It was from Mr. Sterling, Sophia's dad. His voice was this mixture of exhausted and furious that I'll never forget. Like a man who'd been dealing with this same problem for years and was just completely done. He said, "Ethan, I need you to know something. We haven't given Sophia money in over 2 years. We cut her off completely because she had a serious spending problem. And when she told us about this Las Vegas trip, we explicitly told her we wouldn't pay for it, and she needed to cancel." I just sat there listening as he explained that Sophia had been hiding $40,000 in credit card debt from me. That she'd opened new cards in her name only that I didn't know about. That she'd been making minimum payments and juggling balances. And that after this Las Vegas incident, her total debt was probably over $60,000. He was completely done bailing her out because they'd been doing it for years, and it never helped. He told me he was flying to Las Vegas that night to deal with the legal situation, not because he wanted to help her, but because he didn't want her to have a criminal record that would completely destroy her life. And then he said something that really stuck with me. He said, "I love my daughter, but she needs to face consequences. And honestly, Ethan, you should think very carefully about whether you want to tie yourself to this, because this is who she is." And then he apologized to me. Actually apologized for not warning me sooner about her spending habits and her lies. I realized that this man had been watching his daughter manipulate and lie to me for 2 years, and probably felt terrible about it, but didn't know how to intervene without causing a huge family blow-up. I sat in my apartment for the rest of that Sunday afternoon, blocked Sophia's friends on everything, ignored the calls from her sister, and started making a list of what I needed to do next. The first item on that list was, call off the wedding. But I didn't know yet that the real drama was still ahead of me. Sophia got back to town Wednesday afternoon. I knew because Mr. Sterling texted me that he'd picked her up from the airport. She was an absolute mess, crying the entire flight back, barely speaking to him, except to blame everyone else for what happened. He warned me that she'd probably try to come to the apartment to talk things out, and I should prepare myself. I'd spent those 3 days without her doing a lot of thinking. Like, really deep thinking about what kind of life I'd been signing up for. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became, this wasn't just about money or one bad decision in Las Vegas. This was about fundamental values. About honesty, about trust, about the kind of partner someone is when things get difficult, and whether they take responsibility or blame everyone else. She called me around 6 p.m. that evening. I could tell she'd been crying for hours, her voice all raw and shaky. She immediately launched into this whole prepared speech about how sorry she was, how she'd made a terrible mistake, how the trip got out of control, and the girls kept ordering more bottles, and she panicked when the cards declined. I let her talk for maybe 2 minutes before I cut her off. I said, "Sophia, this wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern." And she got quiet. That way people do when they know you're absolutely right but don't want to admit it, because that would mean taking real responsibility. I told her about my conversation with her dad. About the $40,000 in hidden debt I'd never known about. About the 2 years of systematic lying. About how she'd been cut off long before we started dating. And she tried to flip it on me, like I knew she would. Started saying I'd abandoned her in her darkest moment, that a real partner would have helped her instead of leaving her to get arrested. That I'd humiliated her in front of her friends, and now everyone knew we had problems. That's when I knew for sure that she didn't actually understand what she'd done wrong, or why this was a deal breaker. She kept framing it like the problem was that I hadn't sent the money. Not that she'd lied about everything for 2 years. Not that she'd built an entire lifestyle on credit cards and deception and expected me to fund it. Just that I'd failed some kind of test by not bailing her out when she got caught. I realized we were speaking completely different languages when it came to responsibility, trust, and what a partnership actually means. I told her very clearly, and I remember these words exactly, this isn't about the $2,000 in Las Vegas. This is about the $60,000 in total debt you hid from me. This is about lying to my face for months about your dad paying for things. This is about building a life together on a foundation of complete deception. She started crying again, begging for another chance, saying she'd get help. She'd talk to a financial counselor. She'd cut up her credit cards. She'd do whatever it took. But I'd already made my decision. Nothing she said was going to change it, because I'd finally seen her clearly. The next morning, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I'd prepared for this. Had a box of her stuff by the door, all her clothes, toiletries, and the random things she'd accumulated at my place over 2 years. When she saw that box sitting there, she just crumbled. Physically slid down the doorframe onto the floor, crying, asking me how I could do this to her, how I could throw away everything we'd built, how I could give up on us over one mistake. I stood there looking at this woman I'd almost married and felt absolutely nothing except relief. Like I'd just dodged the biggest bullet of my entire life. And I told her something I'd been rehearsing. We didn't build anything, sophomore. You built a fantasy and expected me to pay for it. That was the last conversation we ever had as a couple. I handed her the box. She took it while still crying, and she left. I closed the door and locked it, and felt this massive weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for 2 years. The aftermath was brutal in ways I didn't expect. Not for me, but for her. I heard about it through mutual friends who hadn't completely taken her side in the breakup. She'd lost her apartment within a month because she couldn't make rent without my contribution, which I found out later had been covering about 40% of her monthly expenses. She had to move back in with her parents, who basically put her on complete financial lockdown. Took away all her credit cards, gave her an allowance of $200 a week, made her account for every single dollar she spent, and monitored her bank account. She also lost her job. Apparently, she called in sick for 3 days after Las Vegas without actually clearing it with her boss. When she finally showed up on Thursday, her boss had already heard about the incident through some industry connection because Las Vegas is a small world, and they let her go during her probation period. No explanation needed, completely legal. Her total debt ended up being around $70,000 once you factored in the club's civil suit, the legal fees from the arrest, the maxed-out credit cards, and some personal loans I hadn't even known about. Mr. Sterling hired a lawyer to negotiate payment plans and settlements, but made it very clear to Sophia that she would be paying back every single cent herself over the next decade. No more bailouts. No more enabling. This was her mess to fix. The friend group completely imploded in spectacular fashion. Chloe, Isabella, Mia, and Ava all basically ghosted Sophia once they realized she'd been lying about her financial situation and had made them all look bad. Apparently, there was a lot of